This is White Plains Week, the weekly news roundup. With your moderator, John Bailey, editor and publisher of the daily internet newspaper White Plains Citizen Net Reporter. Jim Benaroff, editor and publisher of SuburbanStreet.com and WhitePlains.com. And Peter Katz, noted broadcaster and journalist. White Plains Week, what's happened, who are the newsmakers, and what's in store for the future. The views and opinions expressed on this program are solely those of the participants. White Plains Week is presented Fridays at 7:30 and again on Mondays at 7 p.m. here on Channel 76. Now, White Plains Week.
Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. White Plains and Westchester, and folks watching on White Plains Week and YouTube around the world. John Bailey, the Citizen Net reporter, joined today by Peter Katz, the anchor for all seasons on my right, and correspondent Ayanna Mead on our left, who will be talking about the big Council of Neighborhood Associations meetings with the mayor this week. But right now, time for the headlines with Peter Katz.
Thank you, John. And here are the headlines for the White Plains Week being recorded December 10th, 2015. As we mark the 74th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor on Monday, December 7th, security, immigration, terrorism dominated the national scene in the wake of the San Bernardino, California massacre. We'll have something from the president on the subject. White Plains' Jack Harrington, age 96, a veteran of World War II, was honored by the state legislature for his service. The grandfather who suffered smoke inhalation when he tried to rescue his granddaughter during a fire has died. The city approves cabaret permits for the Black Bear and Copper-Faced Jacks. This was after the Westchester District Attorney named the two bars as places where White Plains fireman Eric Reffick drank shortly before he collided with a car driven by a woman, killing her and seriously injuring her passenger on South Lexington Avenue. A new lobbying group called Neighbors Act has called for the Common Council to reconsider their vote on the French-American School project. The Gedney Association calls this new group nothing more than a public relations gesture by FASNY. Mayor Tom Roach visits the Council of Neighborhood Associations meeting, and he has a shopping list of surprises in store for us. Governor Cuomo's task force on the Common Core delivers its recommendations on fixing education in New York. The county executive and county legislature argue over how to fix the deficit in the upcoming budget. Though both parties seem to approve of the budget idea, they differ on how to pay for it. Heineken is going to move 55 more jobs to its headquarters in White Plains. It's a lot of the creative department being moved out of New York City up here to White Plains. Winterfest, an arts and food festival celebrating the winter season, begins a week run in White Plains this coming Saturday. It'll be running through Sunday, all next week. It is weatherproof. They're doing it under tents, and actually the weather has been so beautiful and warm that they might even consider changing the name to something like Springfest. And the city announces new security procedures for the New Year ball drop, New Year's Eve downtown. John?
All right, thank you, Peter. And now we go to the Rolo Newsreel March of Time for December the 10th. And, of course, we have a photograph of Jack Harrington, the White Plains World War II veteran and well-known White Plains personality, with State Senator Andrea Stewart Cousins, who presented Mr. Harrington with an award naming him to the State Senate, New York State Senate Veterans Hall of Fame.
And actually, the Hall of Fame really honors all veterans who served their country.
Yes.
And there are people right now serving their country overseas in places like the Middle East, and that, of course, has dominated the national news recently. In fact, even this past week, John, President Obama, for only the third time in his 7 years in office, addressed the nation from the Oval Office, and the subject, of course, was terrorism. The speech was designed to reposition the president as a strong leader whose administration has clear policies to deal with the threat posed by terrorists and to show that he's exerting international leadership in the fight against ISIS, which he still refers to as ISIL. Now, he described 4 things his administration is doing.
First, our military will continue to hunt down terrorist plotters in any country where it is necessary. In Iraq and Syria, airstrikes are taking out ISIL leaders, heavy weapons, oil tankers, infrastructure. And since the attacks in Paris, our closest allies, including France, Germany, and the United Kingdom, have ramped up their contributions to our military campaign, which will help us accelerate our effort to destroy ISIL. Second, we will continue to provide training and equipment to tens of thousands of Iraqi and Syrian forces fighting ISIL on the ground so that we take away their safe havens. In both countries, we're deploying special operations forces who can accelerate that offensive. We've stepped up this effort since the attacks in Paris, and will continue to invest more in approaches that are working on the ground. Third, we're working with friends and allies to stop ISIL's operations, to disrupt plots, cut off their financing, and prevent them from recruiting more fighters. Since the attacks in Paris, we've surged intelligence sharing with our European allies. We're working with Turkey to seal its border with Syria. And we are cooperating with Muslim-majority countries and with our Muslim communities here at home to counter the vicious ideology that ISIL promotes online. Fourth, with American leadership, the international community has begun to establish a process and timeline to pursue ceasefires and a political resolution to the Syrian war.
Now, critics of the president, especially the Republican candidates for president, such as Donald Trump, said the president's speech was not terribly exciting, and those 4 major initiatives that he described were just a rehash of existing policies which haven't worked very well until now and are unlikely to be very effective in the future. And the interesting thing is that Donald Trump has used his outright criticism of the president and just about anything else that he doesn't like to catapult himself to the leadership in the race for the Republican presidential nomination. The latest polls taken just yesterday, released just yesterday, indicate that he has more than 30% of the electorate, the potential electorate, behind him, which is shocking for someone who was not taken as a serious candidate or a serious politician for that
Well,
matter.
I think he's a very serious candidate.
I think he's become that way now.
Yeah, frighteningly so. This whole scenario kind of reminds me of a satirical movie called Idiocracy, where the leader of the nation was a WWE wrestler, which of course Trump has had experience in, and it was about a young man who was catapulted into the future, and he was basically the smartest person on the planet because everybody else was dumb. The IQs of the nation were reduced, and all there was soda coming out of the taps, and we're almost getting to be that type of a country where somebody of this ilk could be catapulted to the highest station in the land. So it's kind of scary.
Some people might find hints of a different movie, The Great Dictator by Charlie Chaplin, in looking at some of the demagoguery we have been seeing on the Republican side. But it's interesting, though, that the president did make that Oval Office speech to try to reposition himself, because they also are, and this is something which has not been reported elsewhere, so here's a bit of a first. They are making an effort behind the scenes to keep news people briefed on the very specific anti-terrorism actions which are going on. I have been getting almost daily briefing reports from the National Security Council And because they're releasing it, it's no longer classified, so it can be talked about. For example, as of yesterday at 3:59 p.m., and I'm reading this from the report that I received yesterday afternoon, the U.S. and its coalition forces have conducted a total of 8,783 airstrikes in Iraq and Syria. The U.S. Itself conducted 6,846 of those airstrikes. And this goes on and on with the specifics, the kinds of information which you would think would be classified, and in fact used to be classified, because you don't want your enemy to know exactly what you're doing. But here there is a campaign to attempt to position the current administration as being very strong in an anti-terrorist activity.
Action, not rhetoric.
Something like that,
Something
John,
like
exactly,
that.
Yeah.
And of course, President Obama did what he did best in that speech. Very calm, reasoned. It was a come on, let's calm down, everybody speech.
Yeah.
So, this is, we're dealing with it. And, that's what your parents would do.
Now,
right?
Here, looking at something a little more local, on the statewide basis, we've seen some repositioning in Albany on the part of Governor Cuomo and his administration when it comes to Common Core, one of the most talked about and yet misunderstood things going on in our educational system.
Well, his task force on recommending how to fix Common Core came out yesterday in a press release late in the afternoon saying it needs to be overhauled, and it's going to be adopting new high-quality, locally driven New York State-specific design standards, and also they're reducing over-testing to reduce anxiety.
Now, some people see this, as just more muddling on the part of politicians of the educational system. I see it as a rather seismic shift on the part of the governor's administration in Albany in acknowledging
it's rolling out a policy
that yes,
5 to 7 years.
This Common Core business is a failure. And now we're going to really do something about it and take the issue seriously.
But they haven't spelled it out too much. In fact, the Journal News article about this whole thing quoted 2 quotes from leaders commenting on this, which bother me. The Partnership for Educational Justice said that the recommendation was disheartening. The quote from their executive director: despite research showing that effective teachers are the most critical factor in a student's educational success, Albany's leaders are backing down from high standards for teachers, said Ralia Polakranis, the group's executive director. Meanwhile, Robert Wright, the executive director of the State Council of School Superintendents, said challenging standards are essential, but Common Core leaves room for improvement. We are encouraged that the report acknowledges how the last wave of reforms was damaged by thrusting too many major initiatives too fast upon our schools and all at one time. Right, he said. That recognition is essential as we now move to make corrections to those reforms.
Well,
no timetable.
John, and anyone who has been watching this program for any length of time knows that it's been a major point of issue and discussion here as to the failure of the educational system to turn out children who can read, who can do math, who can cope with the various stresses of life.
Yes.
So there has been, up until now, in my viewpoint, a stick our heads in the sand kind of approach on the part of the political establishment.
And, even President Obama has signed a bill completely doing away with No Child Left Behind, the states having to meet government-mandated standards to get aid, and it's now being turned back to the states. This is a huge policy shift, dismantling this Bush legacy.
It's not going to be an issue that will be resolved overnight. It's going to take time. We may lose another generation before the system is finally fixed, but at least there is what I believe to be a seismic shift on the part of the political establishment to publicly acknowledge, yes, there's a problem, yes, there's a failure, and yes, it's time for us to do something about it.
Well, the question is what? And who will decide finally what we are going to do?
You know, I wish I had an answer to that,
That's
but
right.
I keep going
That's
back.
always why
I keep
and
going
what.
back to the way it was when I was in school, and you learned how to read a word at a time. You learned how to write a letter at a time, and you learned how to do math one table at a time.
I mean, I think the idea behind Common Core sounds like a good one in that it tries to emphasize more critical thinking on the part of the students. But obviously, there must be a problem across the board if districts like Scarsdale and Chappaqua if their test scores are lower than they have been in the past. So it can't be just the low-income Black and Brown students that are struggling with this. There seems to be a problem across the board, and so there must be some reform.
But isn't the fact that government now and the well-established Cuomo administration here in New York finally seems to be acknowledging that what we've been doing all along just hasn't worked,
well,
and we
political
need to
pressure.
change.
Well,
we must change.
There's been
pressure.
so much political pressure, so
I mean,
I'm not surprised that he's caved. But yeah, it seems there does need to be some sort of changes made to the system.
As usual, folks, you have to decide the mice that are going to bell the cat.
And you
that's
know,
always a problem.
What will really be interesting will be to see how this is going to unfold here in White Plains. You've talked to the new school superintendent.
Yeah,
you did
interviewed him this way.
A piece with him.
A very long interview.
And my understanding is that he laid out several ideas and plans and concepts.
Yes, we have
but there's not what you would call a firm vision as to how we're going to approach this.
Well, it says we have to improve, but how and what they are doing to improve it is not spelled out. I guess they're just. We don't know how it's going to play out.
Well,
we don't know how they're going to be tested. My question of the school district, if we say that all our children are reading on grade level when they go up to the next grade or very close to it, what does that say about how we're testing them in the class? Somebody has to ask that very simple question, why? And the state has to, as I've said many times in this program, they have to tell us what's wrong with the tests that Pearson created specifically. And they haven't done that. Pearson hasn't defended their test. And on top of that, the new maker of the tests, well, they provided tests for Minnesota that really improved Minnesota's scores. And we'd love to know why the Minnesota students did so much better on their tests.
Did they do better, or was the test just a lot easier? Anyway,
what do you think?
Mayor Roach had some ideas for the future of White Plains this week over at the Council of Neighborhood Associations.
Right, and here's a shot of that coming up. Anyway, Ayanna, you covered that for us. And
there he is, right in the middle of the screen. That's the mayor.
Right.
Yeah, so it was their annual Pizza with the Mayor meeting, and so the mayor basically spelled out his plans for White Plains and what his vision is for the future of White Plains. And a lot of the discussion centered around a lot of the developments, property developments that are popping up in and around White Plains. You have 55 Bank Street. They're putting up 2 16-story apartment buildings near a train station. The Pavilion Mall is being changed into a mixed-use facility with apartments and retail. And you have the Esplanade right across the street from there also being rehabbed into also a mixed-use facility. So there's a lot going on, and of course all of these projects will also center around the Trans Center, the development of the Trans Center. So that will be very pivotal in the development of all of these projects.
And let's see, he also made some real intriguing news that we've never hadn't heard before. and that was he's introducing a new taxi metering system.
Right.
And that really raises a lot of issues right there.
Right, so it's in an effort to standardize the taxi fares because right now we have this zone system. And I know when I take a taxi, I usually use Splendid. Sometimes it'll be $7 from one point to another. Sometimes it'll be $8. So I think there's a need there to get this all on one table.
And of course, the devil is in the details on something like that. For example, how do you use the meter when you have multiple riders going to different locations around the city?
Yes, probably something they haven't thought of.
And one thing that I found especially interesting was that he continues to take the position that red light cameras are for safety and not for revenue generation. And now that has been disproved nationwide, where clearly cities have put them in to try
And
to
he said it
Right,
wasn't
he
going
make money.
He did kind of qualify that statement. He said that the purpose won't be for revenue generation, but they will create revenue. So I'm not sure exactly what that means.
But did anybody ask them what the interview will be, or whether they're going to do the standard contract in which the city does not, nationwide, Peter,
Well,
as you pointed out,
nationwide, typically,
this is all for the person who installs the red
a
lights.
city pays the operator of the cameras and has to provide a minimum number of tickets being written at a particular light. For example, in a contract with Xerox, a municipality had to provide at least 25 tickets given out at each red light camera location within a 16-hour period during
Yes,
the time
and
of the day.
the contract
if
is
they
all
didn't,
important.
If they didn't give out enough tickets, then the municipality had to pay
it back.
Xerox anyway.
They need to create a better deal. Either they buy the cameras and just pay for the installation. But I really think that has to be looked at. It should not be negotiated and presented on the backup material.
Well, it's hard to
Or
find
so
out
much-
exactly what the city is doing unless you carefully read the backup package,
So-
which gets sent to the Common
So
Council.
what was the attitude on FASNY there?
FASNY, there was, I guess there's still a lot of consternation surrounding that topic. A couple of attendees thought that the mayor hadn't been transparent during the review of that entire situation, to which the mayor replied that he thought that he provided a good process that provided citizens to weigh in on the subject, and
the mayor was one who voted in favor of the FASNY project.
Well, he voted to close down
close
the street.
yeah. Which
that
is
would
in essence
provide
voting
access
for.
to the school, which is currently in litigation right now. So his position was that he thinks that that we're basically in a better position with the way that he went about the process to begin with.
And did anyone there have anything to say, or had they even heard about this new group that has popped up in town, this Neighbors Act group, which wants the Common Council to review its FASNY vote?
Yeah, we had a shot of the letter they presented to the Common Council here.
No, there was no mention of the Neighbors Act group during the meeting.
Really? That's very interesting. But anyway, they wanted the Common Council presenting this request at the Citizens to be Heard segment, which isn't televised, and they asked the council to reconsider their vote. Somewhat of an unprecedented request in my memory, the last 15 years. But that would have to be put on an agenda by a unanimous vote by the council, and then a follow-up vote of 4-3, I guess. So
I'm not sure exactly what process you would use to do that, or whether it's something which is really viable while you have a lawsuit pending.
Because that would be sort of admitting it.
Wouldn't it?
Wouldn't it though? So it's it's a strange request.
And over at the county office building these days, you've got two sides there trying to get the other side to admit that they don't know what they're doing when it comes to financing the county budget.
Well, that's what's really funny is that the Mr. Kaplowitz, the head of the Board of Legislators,
Democratic,
the Democratic, and Virginia Perez, another Democrat, voted with the Republicans to pass this budget, and now Mr. Kaplowitz is criticizing the president proposed budget, which actually asks for the same amount of sales tax increase.
The way it's coming down is that the Democrats, generally speaking, want a tax increase to pay for the deficit that the budget appears to hold, whereas the Republicans and the Astorino administration are saying, no, we're going to continue with our no tax increase policy.
You've often brought up this point. If you have a $140 million fund balance just sitting around doing nothing, what's it for?
Well, exactly.
Are we being overtaxed?
Are we being overtaxed?
Period.
And is the county sitting on too much money when it could take some of that fund balance and use it to balance this budget without raising taxes and without having to do bonding or some other borrowing scheme in order to cover the deficit and then pay for it later on?
All right. What would you do if you were a budgeteer?
Oh gosh, I need to balance my own budget better. I probably need to start there. But I understand that the city has a 0.16% tax cap right now, and I know the mayor during the meeting he did express that that tax cap is pretty difficult, and that he struggles with balancing the budget with those restrictions. But he says that, since he's been in office, we've remained under the tax cap consistently.
Remain under the tax cap, but consistently have increased taxes from year to year.
Now, this is the year for them to raise taxes because they have the excuse of the tax cap, and they don't have to kowtow to it. The cities can just do it.
Typically, as a politician, you want to do your tax increases or your larger tax increases when you're not running for re-election. Because the theory is that people will forget that you have raised their taxes.
He can blame the fact that people aren't spending enough money or something along those lines.
Well, Heineken is going to be spending a little more money here in White Plains. They're bringing a team of their creative people, about 55 workers from New York City, moving them up to their office in White Plains. So that's a plus in the White Plains.
More people will eat lunch and help the sales tax, I think.
Yeah.
And now, finally, I just want to say that I will be talking to you on the air on WVOX on Tuesday.
1460 on the AM dial.
That's right. And then Winterfest begins on Saturday at 11 a.m. and it goes to 7. Food, art, gifts for the family, and that's all for us on White Plains Week. Good night for me, Peter Katz, and good night, Jim Benaroff.
Wherever you are.
Yeah.
White Plains Week has been a presentation of White Plains Citizen Net Reporter, WPCNR.com, in cooperation with Channel 76. Comments may be emailed to WPCNR@AOL.com. The copyrighted print White Plains Cityscape by Leonard Weber is used courtesy of the White Plains Presbyterian Church. For information on its availability, you may contact the church at 761-8585. The views and opinions expressed on the preceding program were solely those of the participants. White Plains Week is presented Fridays at 7:30 and again on Mondays at 7 p.m. here on Channel 76. For White Plains Week, this is Seth Benaroff speaking.